As an adult, looking back with all the 2020 hindsight that comes with maturity, I know that I should know better. That I should look back at myself, standing as I did in that classroom, mouth pressed tightly shut in case any one word of truth accidentally wriggled out, and feel ashamed. I should, as an adult, be able to say what I did was wrong. That by holding my tongue and keeping everything inside, I was just as much to blame as kid. I should be able to say that I'm sorry, not to have spoken up, told the truth and exposed what I knew. I should be able to say these things, but I'm not. I should, I guess, feel sorry. But the truth again is that I'm not. But maybe, after all these years, with Kid having passed away, I can at least tell the truth about what happened, and then you'll see why. The thing is, a lot of the time the things that scare us most in childhood are never shared with the grown-ups. Either because the kids don't want to appear weak or immature to adults, because they don't think the grown-ups would understand, or because something like Michael Lomer prevents them from sharing their fears. The real terrors of childhood are often endured in silence. Michael Lomer was a terror of the kind you don't often find in movies, books, or YouTube channels, and yet was a far more real and immediate danger than any of the ghosts and ghouls that make it into the cinema. Michael came to Morton and to our school midway through what we call Year 10, which is the second last year before leaving. We were all around 14 years of age. Michael, however, was not. He had been expelled from 2 other schools, had spent time in pupil referral units, or at the PRU, as we called it. Essentially systems outside of traditional schools for the most disruptive and disobedient children. Prior to that, he had spent 1 year at a youth detainment center, essentially prison for kids. But after showing some improvement at the PRU, he was eventually reintroduced by a combination of social workers and teachers back into mainstream education, and more specifically, into the seat next to me. By the time he'd worked his way back from the PRU and various other institutions and court hearings, Michael was going on 18. Twice the size of any other boy in our year, 3 times as muscular, and 1,000,000 times more psychotic. In retrospect, it's hard to see what our teachers were thinking. Whilst I'm all for the notion of second chances and rehabilitation, Michael was bigger than some of the teachers, essentially an adult. Throwing him into class with a bunch of 14-year-old boys, not to mention the girls, was uncomfortable, practically unethical, and of no benefit to us or him, except perhaps financially. From day one, Michael Lomer used his size and aggressive nature to steal, extort, and bully money out of anyone and anything that moved. If you were in Michael's line of sight, you were a potential victim. You would see him quickening his walk to approach you, waiting for a moment during which you were close to the wall or by the stairs so that he could use his massive bulk to corner you, backing you against the wall so that you had no means of escape except through him, and that simply wasn't going to happen. Many was the time that I watched from the top deck of the bus as younger students waiting for a bus in the other direction were relieved of their bus fares and forced to walk home in the rain. A few times, 1 or 2 of the bigger lads in our year talked about taking a swipe at Michael, putting him on his arse and making him think twice. For a short while, there was talk that Chris Elliott might smack him one lunchtime. Until that was, Michael pulled a knife out in the playground and threatened to cut Chris's nose off. After that, nobody was going to risk a fight with Michael. Teenage punch-ups weren't uncommon at my school, but nobody believed that a straight-up fight with Michael would end with just fist flying. With him, there was always the genuine fear that he might maim or even kill you if you tried to stand up to him. I once saw him shout across a dining hall for a boy named Tanner to come over and kiss my feet. The kind of humiliating act that he forced a lot of kids to do in public just because he could. When Tanner, standing around 5 meters away at the end of a row of tables, ignored Michael's hollering, trying to pretend that he hadn't heard him over the clatter and ding of the dining room noise, Michael picked up a heavy-bottomed water glass and hurled it across the room at him. It clipped Tanner and smashed just above his ear, cutting him badly in the process. Suddenly, there was no ding, just the absolute silence above which Tanner screamed and cried. When the lunchtime supervisor finally arrived and asked what happened, nobody would speak up. If Michael was willing to do that across the room, what would he be willing to do to someone who grassed him up? Even Tanner himself was too scared to say anything and instead told the dinner lady that he had fallen, though of course the entire year group knew better. The most horrific thing about Michael Lomer was that his bullying wasn't just a means of extracting money. Often it involved seemingly random acts of cruelty, carried out for no reason whatsoever, other than Michael's own amusement. There was the time he chewed up a huge wad of bubblegum and waited by the doors for Clara Burton to come through. Clara was a pretty girl with beautiful curled red hair. Michael had shown an interest in her romantically and she had rejected him. So as punishment, he took the wad of chewing gum and slapped it down right in the center of her head, pulling and raking with his fingers so that it became enmeshed and entwined with her hair. Clara screamed and cried for someone to help her, but nobody did. We were all too terrified. The next day, she came to school with her head shaved. Her mother had been unable to remove the gum and had been forced to instead cut it out. The resulting mess was not worth saving, and so the clippers were brought out as the only viable solution. Another of Michael's favorite games was to wait until a teacher decoded to put us into groups of perhaps 4 around a table. He would position himself so that he could sit opposite 2 of us, boys or girls, it didn't matter. Then he would stare straight into our eyes and kick as hard as he could under the table at our shins, his steel-toed cap boots feeling like a baseball bat being swung at a sensitive area. Each time he did it, and each time the flash of pain would be worse, he would stare directly in your eyes and smile, daring you to call out, to scream, or to attract the attention of the teacher, knowing all the well that you wouldn't because you were scared. So for the entire hour he would kick, again and again, harder and harder as the area began to bruise badly. Each time you would wince and cry, biting and chewing on your lips, tears welling in your eyes as you forgot to stifle the scream that threatened to explode out from your throat. When it came time for the teacher to collect your work, and he found that you hadn't even filled in the first question, you would be accused of being lazy and disobedient, and be put in detention, where you knew Michael would already be waiting. Listing these things now, it's hard to explain just what a menacing presence the boy was. How many of my peer group had actual nightmares about him? It's also easy to see that any one of these incidents could have been the one where Michael Lomer went too far. As it happened, that day came with Kit. Kit Fuller was an introverted and therefore almost invincible presence in the classroom. Had it not been for the one incident that scared me for the rest of my life, I doubt that I would have even remembered him. He was a small boy with jet black hair that he wore long and swept over the side in a long fringe that hung down over his eyes, almost as if he was using it as a curtain behind which to hide his face. He had large protuberant eyes but seemed always to be staring down at the floor or hunching away, as if trying somehow to hide within his own body. He was a sensitive and intelligent student. He was also a perfect target for Michael. To say that Kit was singled out might be an exaggeration. Michael's malevolence was indiscriminate and could turn on anyone at any time. It was fair to say that in terms of physical abuse, however, Kit had a real hard time, because he wouldn't cry. In a reversal of the kick the shins under the table game in which Michael would dare us to speak up and force us to be quiet, Michael's special attention for Kit took the opposite view. He wanted Kit to cry. I remember once seeing Michael literally pummeling Kit in a cloakroom. Kit was balled up in a corner and Michael was raining blows down onto his ribs, kidneys, and back, studiously avoiding the face where bruises might be instantaneously detected whilst he screamed at him to cry. Come on, cry! All whilst Kit, absorbing each blow with a hollow, echoing thud, remained almost stoically silent, his lips pressed firmly together, eyes bulging, and with a steadfast determination not to make a sound. Around a week before the day I should have spoken up, I watched a repeat of this episode inside one of the classrooms at lunch. On this occasion, Kit was sitting scrunched up against a metal radiator whilst Michael, standing over him, pressed his face against it with his knee, taking time periodically to stamp as hard as he could on Kit's fingers. Eventually, leaning back a little, Michael began to rummage in Kit's pockets. From them, he removed Kit's wallets, his keys, and a half-smashed chocolate bar. Pocketing the chocolate, he emptied the contents of Kit's wallet and, pressing his knee against the side of Kit's neck, dangled his house key in front of him. "You won't be needing these, will you?" he announced with a laugh, before opening a nearby window and slinging them out onto the grid and smiling as they disappeared with a rattling clink, irrevocably down the drain. Releasing Kit, still somehow unable to bring a tear to his eye, Michael wandered off to find another hapless victim, whilst I, making sure that Michael was well out of the vicinity, helped him to his feet and virtually carried him into the boys' toilet. Kit's face, as a result of the asphyxiation, had turned a horrid shade of purpley red, yet when he turned away from the sink after splashing his face a few times, he was smiling. Walking past me to the paper towel holder, he pulled everyone from it. Then, fishing around inside the small plastic holder, he pulled out an object that had been clearly fastened or taped onto the inside. Locking his eyes on mine, he shuffled hurriedly past me and placed a large plastic syringe, still containing the remnants of some dark blue liquid, onto the surface by the sinks. Then, without saying a word, he wrapped it in a paper towel and, still looking directly at me, pitched it silently into the bin. Looking back now, perhaps I should have said something when the police and teachers stood at the front of the classroom and asked for information. When they told us that Michael wouldn't be coming back, that he was in critical condition, and that the poison he had consumed would probably damage him for the rest of his life, I should have spoken up, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed silent and did nothing, just as the other kids did when Michael, chewing on a chocolate bar he had stolen from Kit, suddenly collapsed on the top deck of the school bus. From what I heard, he rolled and writhed around, white foam and a blue-black liquid pouring from his mouth, reaching and grasping out for help as he kicked and choked and his throat closed up. From what I heard, the other kids just watched. None of them speaking, none of them helping, as the bus continued on and they collectively watched the horror of their childhood squirm and die before them, without saying a word. Michael didn't die, but he never came back. In the 20 years since it happened, I have often thought I should have revealed what I knew, explaining how easy it would have been for Kit to inject a substance into the chocolate, knowing that Michael would steal it, but I never have. Often the terrors of childhood are endured in silence. Maybe once in a while, they should die in silence too.